6 sisters, 1 cabin, 122 acres our family had farmed since the 1840s. The government said sell and leave. We said no. They came back twice more. We said no twice more. By the time they finally took the deed by condemnation, we had already decided something they could not put in any legal document. I want to tell you what that was, because it is the only part of this story that actually matters. My name is Louisa Walker. I am one of 6 sisters who never married and never left the mountain we were born on. We lived in a log cabin in Little Greenbrier Cove in the Great Smoky Mountains of Tennessee, the same cabin our grandfather built in the 1840s, on the same land our father cleared and planted and passed to us. We raised our food, spun our own cloth, doctored ourselves with herbs from the garden, and buried our dead on the hillside above the creek. We did not have electricity. We did not have a telephone. We did not have running water. What we had was 122 acres of mountain land and the knowledge of how to live on it. Little Greenbrier Cove sits at the upper end of a narrow valley carved into the southwestern slope of Cove Mountain by a creek called Little Brier Branch. The nearest town was a full day's walk down the mountain. In winter, when the snow came hard, it was more than that. The forest here does not stay back. You stop working it for a season and it starts taking what you built. That is the kind of country this is. The year I need to start with is 1921. That is the year our father died and left the 6 of us alone on that mountain with a farm to run and no men to run it. What happened in the years that followed and what the government tried to do to us is the story I want to tell you. But before I get to any of that, I need to tell you what kind of women were standing in that cabin when the trouble came, because that part matters too. I want to start with the year our father died, because that is where the real story begins. But to understand what happened in 1921, you need to understand what our father was. John Walker was not a soft man. He walked into Little Greenbrier Cove in the early 1860s, courted our mother, Margaret Jane King, and then left her to go fight for the Union when the Civil War came. He joined an artillery unit in Kentucky. He was captured. He spent time in the Confederate prison at Andersonville, Georgia. And if you know anything about Andersonville, you know that most men who went in there did not come out walking. He came out walking. He came home, married our mother, moved into the cabin her family had built, and went to work. He and our mother had 11 children, 7 daughters and 4 sons. All 11 lived to be adults. In a time and place where children died of fever and infection and simple bad luck, all 11 of John Walker's children grew up. That tells you something about the household he ran. We grew up working. There was no other kind of growing up on that mountain. By the time I was old enough to understand what my hands were for, I was already using them, carrying water from the spring house, feeding chickens, carting wool, picking beans. You did not ask whether you felt like working. The work was there and you did it. That was the whole of the philosophy. The farm at its full size was a serious operation, 122 acres, a barn, a pig pen, a smokehouse, an apple house, a blacksmith shop, a grist mill, an orchard with more than 100 apple trees. We raised cows, sheep, chickens, and hogs. We grew corn, wheat, beans, potatoes, and more vegetables than I can name from memory. Our land produced everything we needed except sugar, soda, coffee, and salt. That was the whole of what we bought from the outside world. Everything else came from what we grew or made or caught or preserved. I was the one they called the jack of all trades. I worked the fields, I chopped wood, I carried my weight at every task on that farm. But what I loved What I did when the day's work was done and there was an hour of light left was right. I wrote poems about the mountains, about the seasons, about what it felt like to live the way we lived. I sold them to visitors later for a quarter or $1, written out neat on paper and illustrated by hand. People seemed to want them. I was never entirely sure why. It seemed to me I was only writing down what any person with eyes could see if they stood still long enough to look. My sister Margaret was the oldest. She ran the household the way our father ran the farm, directly and without much discussion. She ruled the roost, a man who knew her said years later. She told you what to do and when to do it, and you did it. That is about right. Margaret never courted any man. She chose that early, and she never wavered from it, and her influence on the rest of us was considerable, not through force exactly, through something harder to resist than force, through the simple, steady weight of her certainty that this place was worth staying for. Polly was the cook. Martha was the one who kept the accounts, tracked what we had, what we needed, what we owed. Hetty was the finest knitter I ever saw. Her needlework was something people came to see on its own. And then there was Nancy, who was gone before the hardest years came, and Caroline, the only one who married and left. When our father died in 1921, the property passed to the 6 of us who had stayed. No men, no help except what we could ask of relatives when the mule needed working, and that mule had gotten so stubborn in his old age that none of us could handle him. Margaret explained it plainly to a reporter once. She said a Tennessee mule has got to be handled special, and none of us can cuss. That was Margaret. She could say a true thing and make you laugh at it at the same time. We were not afraid of what came after our father died. We knew the work. We had been doing it our whole lives. What none of us knew yet was that something else was coming, something bigger than a hard winter or a sick animal or a mule that would not work for women, something that would test not just what we could do with our hands, but what we were willing to hold on to when the pressure got serious. That was still a few years off, but it was coming, and I need to tell you what kind of women we were before it arrived. Well, I will tell you how I learned what I know about this land, not from a book, from the land itself. Our mother knew every plant on that mountain that could heal a person. Horseradish, boneset, peppermint. She grew them in the herb garden outside the back door. Sassafras to build the blood. Ragweed to ease the itch of poison ivy. The wild plants in the forest each had a use if you knew what you were looking at. She taught us the way her mother had taught her. You watched. You remembered. You did not write it down because writing it down was not the point. The point was knowing it the way you know your own hands. I was 15 years old when I spent my first winter managing the smokehouse alone. Our mother was sick that year, and Margaret had more than she could carry already. I was the one who went out in the cold every morning, checked what we had hanging, made sure nothing had gone wrong overnight. There were mornings that February when the temperature dropped hard enough that the air hurt to breathe. I went out anyway. That is not bravery. That is just what the work required. By the time I was 20, I had been doing the full work of that farm for years. Spinning, weaving, planting, harvesting, preserving, doctoring, building, repairing. The work was not a burden. It was the shape of a day. It was what morning meant and what evening meant and what the seasons meant. 20 years of that country, and I thought nothing could surprise me. I was wrong. I found out how wrong in 1926. The year 1926 is when Congress authorized the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I want to be honest about how that news arrived to us. It did not arrive like a thunderclap. It came the way bad weather comes in the mountains. You see it building on the ridgeline for a while before it reaches you. We heard that land was being purchased. We heard that families were being asked to sell and move out. We heard the numbers people were being offered. Some of those numbers were not bad numbers for the time. Some families took them and went. We did not go. In 1933, a man came up from the Park Commission with an offer. I do not remember the exact figure he brought that first time. I remember that Margaret listened to everything he said and then told him that the land was not for sale. He said the park was coming regardless. Margaret said that may well be and showed him to the door. He was not the last. In July of 1939, a representative came up from Washington. He had been sent specifically to negotiate with us. He sat at our table and talked about what the government could offer and what the park would become and what a fine thing it would be for the region. We listened. We had an attorney by then. The land had been appraised at $5,466. We asked for $7,000. They said no. We said then we are still not selling. He went back down the mountain. I want you to understand something about what we were holding on to. It was not stubbornness for its own sake. It was not ignorance of what the modern world had to offer. We knew perfectly well what was out there. We had chosen this instead. The spinning wheel in the corner of that cabin, the smell of wood smoke in the morning, the sound of the creek running below the spring house, the apple trees our father had planted, the herb garden our mother had tended, the graves on the hillside. You cannot put a number on what those things are worth because they are not the kind of thing that has a price. And once you understand that, once you really understand it in your bones, no man with papers in his coat pocket can talk you out of it. I was 57 years old in 1939. I had lived on that mountain my entire life. I had never spent a night away from it that I can recall. And sitting across the table from that government man, I felt something I can only describe as a kind of cold clarity. He thought he was negotiating for land. He was not negotiating for land. He was negotiating for the only life any of us had ever known. And that was not something we were prepared to give away for any number he could write on a piece of paper. We held out. We held out until 1940, and then something changed. They stopped asking. They condemned the land instead. The deed passed to the United States on January the 22nd, 1941. On paper, we no longer owned the ground we were standing on, but the agreement we reached, and we fought hard for this part, gave us the right to live there for the rest of our lives. They could have the deed. They could not have us. What they took along with the deed was the right to farm our own land the way we had always farmed it. No hunting, no fishing, no cutting timber, no grazing livestock beyond what we already had. The mountain we had worked every day of our lives became, in the eyes of the law, a place we were guests in our own home. I sat with that for a long time. Some nights I am still sitting with it, but we stayed, and that is what I want to tell you about next, because the years that followed were not what you might expect. Some of you watching this right now have held on to something past the point where holding on made practical sense. A piece of land, a way of doing things, a version of yourself you were not ready to give up. I am not going to tell you whether that was right or wrong. I just want you to know I understand the feeling. It is not nostalgia. It is not stubbornness. It is something closer to knowing who you are. That is what we were holding on to, and that is why we stayed. The years between 1941 and the mid-1940s were the years I think of now as the ones where we found out what we were actually made of. We had lost the legal right to work our land the way we had always worked it. What we had left was the cabin, the garden, the orchard, and the knowledge in our hands. We still had the spinning wheels. We still had the loom. We still had the herb garden and the apple trees and the spring house and the skills our mother and father had spent a lifetime teaching us. You cannot condemn a person's knowledge. You cannot put that in a legal document. So we adapted. We grew what we could in the kitchen garden. We tended the orchard. We kept some animals. We made things, cloth, doilies, little wooden toys, fried apple pies, and when visitors started coming, we sold what we made to them. A quarter for a poem, $1 for a doily. Whatever they would pay for a fried apple pie made from apples grown on trees our father had planted 30 years before. I need to tell you what those years were like in the body. I was past 60. Martha was past 60. Margaret was in her 70s. The work that had been the ordinary labor of younger women was harder now, hauling water from the spring house in winter, keeping the fire through the night when the temperature dropped, carrying in wood when the snow was knee-deep and the path from the woodpile had to be broken fresh every morning. We had a system. We always had a system. You did not waste motion. You did not do today what could wait until tomorrow without cost. You learned to read the weather 3 days ahead by watching the ridgeline and the behavior of the animals. There is one winter that stays with me. It was the late 1940s after Polly was gone and Hetty was gone, and it was just the three of us, Martha, Margaret, and me. A storm came in hard from the northwest, and we had wood enough for a week, but the path to the barn was buried chest deep by the second morning. The temperature did not come above 0 for 4 days. I want you to understand something about cold like that. It is not uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is not the right word. Cold like that gets inside the structure of your body and starts changing things. Your hands stop being your hands. Your thoughts slow down. You stop being a person and you become a problem that needs solving. I was that problem on that mountain for 4 days, solving myself, getting up each morning and doing what the morning required. That is all. There is nothing heroic in it. It is just what the work required, and so you did it. We got through that winter. We got through every winter. The farm, reduced as it was, kept producing. The orchard kept bearing. The garden kept giving. We kept spinning and weaving and making and selling and writing and singing hymns in the evening by the fire. Then 1946 came, and everything got strange in a way we had not anticipated. The Saturday Evening Post published an article about us. A man named John Maloney had come up and interviewed us and written a piece he called "Time Stood Still in the Smokies." I will tell you what Margaret said when she saw the magazine. She looked at it for a long moment, and she said that she did not know why people found it remarkable to live as your parents and grandparents had lived and see no reason to do otherwise. Then she set the magazine down and went back to her spinning. But the article brought people, more people than we had ever seen come up that trail. They came from all over the country, every state, it seemed. They walked up the path to the porch and stared at us like we were something in a museum and asked us questions about how we lived and bought our pies and our doilies and my poems and took photographs. We were polite. We were raised to be polite. No one was ever turned away from that porch, and if there were too many guests for one sitting, we set a second table. Martha kept a soldier's socks warm during the war. She had knitted them herself from wool off our own sheep, and when someone asked her about it, she said she reckoned it was not every soldier in Germany who could say his old maid aunts had raised his socks off a rocky mountainside for him. That was Martha. She did not say much, but when she did, it landed. The open loop I planted at the start, what we had decided that no legal document could touch, I have not forgotten it. I will get to it. But there is one more thing about these years that I need to tell you first. The thing the visitors never quite understood, and I do not blame them because it is not an easy thing to explain, is the difference between the life they were looking at and the life they were imagining they were looking at. They saw women in old-fashioned dresses who did not have electricity. They saw spinning wheels and a wood fire and a cabin that looked like it belonged to another century. And what they thought they were seeing was deprivation, a hard life, a life of doing without. What I was actually living was something different. Let me tell you what freedom looked like on a Tuesday morning in October when the frost had come the night before and burned the last of the summer off the garden, and the air had that particular cold clarity that only comes in the Smokies in fall. I went out to the orchard before breakfast. The apples were ready. I picked for an hour in the quiet, just the sound of the creek below and the occasional crow somewhere on the ridge. And by the time I came in with a full basket, my hands were cold and my back was telling me about it, and I felt more awake and more like myself than I had words for. That is what I was living. That is what it looked like from the inside. There is a difference between solitude and loneliness, and I want to be clear about which one I knew. I knew solitude. Solitude is a room of your own inside yourself that the world cannot enter without your permission. I had that. I had that every morning in that orchard, every evening riding by lamplight, every hour at the spinning wheel when my hands knew what to do and my mind could go where it wanted. Loneliness is something else. Loneliness is wanting a thing you cannot have. I had what I wanted. I was not lonely, but I will not pretend there was no cost. Polly never fully healed from losing her man to that train accident. We used to say, poor Sister Polly, she died of a broken heart, and we meant it as tenderness, not pity. She carried that loss every day I knew her, and she did not complain about it, and she did not let it make her useless. But it was there. It was in her face in the evenings. I knew it the way you know weather that has not arrived yet. She was my sister, and I could not fix it, and there is no clean resolution to that. I am just telling you what it was. What this life gave that nothing else could was this. It gave me myself, completely, without the noise that the modern world makes around a person, drowning out the sound of who they actually are. I knew who I was because I had never had the option of pretending to be something else. The mountain does not let you pretend. The work does not let you pretend. The cold does not let you pretend. You are exactly what you are, every day in every season. Most people never get that. I had it my entire life. The unanswerable thing, and I will leave this where it sits because I do not have a clean answer for it, is Margaret, whether she was right to hold us all in place the way she did. Whether what she called taking care of the home was also, in some measure, taking care of herself and calling it the family good. I do not say this in bitterness. I say it because it is true and because a true thing deserves to be said plain. She was the oldest, and she loved that place with everything she had, and she believed with her whole heart that staying was the right thing, and she made it impossible for the rest of us to think otherwise. Whether we would have chosen the same without her weight behind it, I cannot tell you. I have asked myself that question every year of my life, and I still do not have the answer. 5 more years of that life lay ahead. And then something arrived that tested everything we had built in a way I could not have prepared for. It started with the sound of Martha coughing. She had been coughing since the previous fall, a dry sound deep in the chest. We had treated it the way our mother would have treated it. Bone-set tea, hot poultices, rest when rest was possible. By the spring of 1951, I knew the herbs were not going to be enough. Martha was 74 years old. She had worked that farm every day of her life. She was the quiet one, the one who kept the accounts, the one who, when she spoke, made people listen. I sat with her on the porch one afternoon when the dogwoods were out and the light was coming through the trees at that low angle it gets in April, and she said to me, "Louisa, you know I'm not going to last the summer." I said I knew. We did not say anything else about it. We sat there and listened to the creek and watched the light change. Martha died in 1951. She was the last of the three of us who had been keeping the farm together. After she was gone, it was only Margaret and me. I was 68 years old. Margaret was 81. Two women on a mountain with a cabin to maintain, a garden to tend, and visitors who kept coming up the trail even though we had less and less to give them. In 1953, Margaret and I wrote a letter to the Park Service asking them to take down the visitors' welcome sign. We said we were too old and tired to get the work done and receive guests at the same time. That is what we said in the letter. What the letter did not say was that we were grieving, that every face that came up that trail was a reminder of how few of us were left to meet it. Margaret and I wrote that letter together, sitting at the same table where the government man had set his hat in 1939. I wrote it out in my best hand. We signed it together. The rangers started checking on us after that. They would come up the trail and see that we were all right and help when the snow got deep or something needed doing that was past what two old women could manage alone. I will not pretend we did not need that help. We needed it. We were grateful for it. We were not too proud to be grateful. Margaret turned 88, 90, 91. She sat in her chair by the fire in the evenings and quoted scripture and sang hymns in a voice that was still strong when everything else about her had gotten slow and careful. She was the last person I expected to outlast me. She had always seemed to me like something built out of a harder material than the rest of us, oak where the others were pine. She died in 1962. She was 92 years old. She had never spent a night away from that mountain in her life, as far as I know. After Margaret was gone, I was the last one in the cabin, the last one. I want to tell you now what I decided, the thing that no legal document could touch, the thing I told you about at the start. What we decided, what Margaret decided first, and the rest of us decided behind her, each in our own time and in our own way, was not a decision about land. It was a decision about what a life is. It was the decision that a life is not something that happens to you in the place where the world puts you. A life is something you build in the place where you chose to stand. And once you have built it, truly built it, with your hands and your years and everything you learned from the people who came before you, it does not matter what the government writes on a piece of paper. You are still standing in it. You are still living it. They can take the deed. They cannot take what the deed was a deed to. We chose this. Every morning we chose it again. The cold water from the spring house, the weight of the wool on the spinning wheel, the smell of apple wood burning, the sound of the creek in the dark. We chose it against every pressure the modern world could bring to bear on 6 women on a mountain. We chose it when they came with money, and we chose it when they came with legal documents, and we chose it every morning for as long as we lived. I do not know if we were right. I know we were not wrong. Some of you watching this have made a choice that the people around you did not understand, stayed somewhere when the sensible thing was to go, kept something alive when everyone told you it was finished, held a version of yourself that the world kept trying to talk you out of. I am not going to tell you what that means. You already know what it means. I just want you to know that you are not the only one who made that choice, and that the making of it, the daily, deliberate, unremarkable making of it, is not a small thing. It is the whole thing. Louisa Walker, she held on the longest. The cabin is still there. Go see it if you ever get up into the Smokies. Walk the 1.5 miles up from Metcalf Bottoms. Put your hand on the log wall. The wood is old, but it is solid. It was built by people who built things to last. There is a question historians still argue about these women, whether Margaret Walker kept her sisters on that mountain out of love for the land or love of control, or whether in the end those two things were the same thing. If you think you know the answer, write it below. I have been thinking about it for a long time, and I am still not sure. And if you want to hear about another person who chose the harder version and held it until the end, stay right here. The next story is one I think you will want to hear.